Windows 3.x program could knock out surrounding processes. The Win32 API is implemented by 3 modules, each consisting of a 16-bit and a 32-bit component. Kernel provides high-level access to memory and process management, and access to the file system. Consists of KRNL386.exe kernel 32.dll, and Win32.vxd. User responsible for managing and drawing the various user interface components, such as windows, menus and buttons. Consists of user.exe and user32.dll. Graphics device interface, GDI, responsible for drawing graphics in a device-independent way. Consists of GDI.exe and GDI32.dll. Dependence on MS-DOS. Command.com running in a Windows console on Windows 95, MS-DOS prompt, to end users. MS-DOS appears as an underlying component of Windows 95. For example, it is possible to prevent loading of the graphical user interface and boot the system into a real-mode MS-DOS environment. This was done by inserting command.com into the autoexec.bat file or changing the boot GUI variable in the MS-DOS.system file to 0. This sparked debate amongst users and professionals regarding the extent to which Windows 95 is an operating system or merely a graphical shell running on top of MS-DOS. 16, 17, 18. When the graphical user interface is started, the virtual machine manager takes over the file system-related and disk-related functionality. MS-DOS itself is demoted to a compatibility layer for 16-bit device drivers. 16. This contrasts with earlier versions of Windows which rely on MS-DOS to perform file and disk access. Windows for Workgroups 3.11 could also largely bypass MS-DOS when 32-bit file access and 32-bit disk access were enabled. Keeping MS-DOS in memory allows Windows 95 to use DOS device drivers when suitable Windows drivers are unavailable. Windows 95 is capable of using all 16-bit Windows 3.x drivers. Unlike Windows 3.x, DOS programs running in Windows 95 do not need DOS drivers for the mouse, CD-ROM and sound card. Windows drivers are used instead. IMM.system is still required to boot Windows 95. EMM386 and other memory managers, however, are only used by DOS programs. In addition, config.system and autoexec.bat settings, aside from IMM.system, do not affect Windows programs. DOS games, which could not be executed on Windows 3.x, can run inside Windows 95. Games tended to lock up Windows 3.x or cause other problems. As with Windows 3.x, DOS programs that use EGA or VGA graphics modes run in windowed mode. CGA and text mode programs can continue to run. 16. On startup, the MS-DOS component in Windows 95 responds to a pressed F8 key by temporarily pausing the default boot process and presenting the DOS boot options menu, allowing the user to continue starting Windows normally. Start Windows in safe mode or exit to the DOS prompt. 17. As in previous versions of MS-DOS, there is no 32-bit support and DOS drivers must be loaded for mice and other hardware. As a consequence of DOS compatibility, Windows 95 has to keep internal DOS data structures synchronized with those of Windows 95. When starting a program, even a native 32-bit Windows program, MS-DOS momentarily executes to create a data structure known as the program segment prefix. It is even possible for MS-DOS to run out of conventional memory while doing so, preventing the program from launching. 17. Windows 3.x allocated fixed segments in conventional memory first. Since the segments were allocated as fixed, Windows could not move them, which would prevent any more programs from launching. Microsoft partially removed support for file control blocks, an API holdover of DOS 1.x and CP/M, in Windows 95 OS R2, OEM Service Release 2. FCP functions can read FAT32 volumes, but not write to them. User interface. Windows 95 introduced a redesigned shell based around a desktop metaphor. File shortcuts, also known as shell links, were introduced, 19, and the desktop was repurposed to hold shortcuts to applications, files and folders, reminiscent of Mac OS. In Windows 3.1 the desktop was used to display icons of running applications. In Windows 95, the currently running applications were displayed as buttons on a taskbar across the bottom of the screen. 20. The taskbar also contained a notification area used to display icons for background applications, a volume control and current time. 21. The Start menu, invoked by clicking the Start button on the taskbar or by pressing the Windows key, was introduced as an additional means of launching applications or opening documents. While maintaining the program groups used by its predecessor Program Manager, it also displayed applications within cascading submenus. 22. The previous File Manager program was replaced by Windows Explorer, and the Explorer-based control panel and several other special folders were added, such as My Computer, Dial-Up Networking, Recycle Bin, Network Neighborhood, My Documents, Recent Documents, Fonts, Printers, and My Briefcase, among others. Autorun was introduced for CD drives. The user interface looked dramatically different from prior versions of Windows, but its design language did not have a special name like Metro, Aqua or Material Design. Internally it was called the New Shell and later simply the Shell. 23. The subproject within Microsoft to develop the new shell was internally known as Stimpy. 24. In 1994, Microsoft designers Mark Malamud and Eric Gavriluk approached Brian Eno to compose music for the Windows 95 project. 25. The result was the 6-second startup music sound of the Windows 95 operating system, the Microsoft Sound, and it was first released as a startup sound in May 1995 on Windows 95 May test release build 468. 26. When released for Windows 95 and Windows NT 4.0, Internet Explorer 4 came with an optional Windows desktop update, which modified the shell to provide several additional updates to Windows Explorer, including a quick launch toolbar, and new features integrated with Internet Explorer, such as Active Desktop, which allowed Internet content to be displayed directly on the desktop. Some of the user interface elements introduced in Windows 95, such as the desktop, taskbar, start menu and Windows Explorer File Manager, remained fundamentally unchanged on future versions of Windows. Technical improvements. Windows 95 included support for 255-character mixed-case long file names, 27, and preemptively multitasked protected mode 32-bit applications. 16-bit processors were still cooperatively multitasked. Plug and play. Windows 95 tried to automate device detection and configuration as much as possible, but could still fall back to manual settings if necessary. During the initial install process of Windows 95, it would attempt to automatically detect all devices installed in the system. Windows 95 also introduced the Device Manager to indicate which devices were working optimally with correct drivers and configuration, and to allow the user to override automatic plug-and-play based driver installation with manual options, or give a choice of several semi-automatic configurations to try to free up resources for devices that still needed manual configuration. Long file names. 32-bit file access is necessary for the long file names feature introduced with Windows 95 through the use of the FAT file system extension. It is available to both Windows programs and MS-DOS programs started from Windows. They have to be adapted slightly, since accessing long file names requires using larger path name buffers and hence different system calls. Competing DOS-compatible operating systems released before Windows 95 cannot see these names. Using older versions of DOS utilities to manipulate files means that the long names are not visible and are lost if files are moved or renamed and by the copy, but not the original, if the file is copied. During a Windows 95 automatic upgrade of an older Windows 3.1 system, DOS and third-party disk utilities which can destroy long file names are identified and made unavailable. When Windows 95 is started in DOS mode, for example for running DOS programs, low-level access to disks is locked out. In case the need arises to depend on disk utilities that do not recognize long file names, such as the MS-DOS 6. XSDFrag utility, a program called LFNBASEEK for backup and restoration of long file names is provided on the CD-ROM, specifically in its /admin/apptools/offenback directory.32-bit. Windows 95 followed Windows for Workgroups 3.11 with its lack of support for older, 16-bit x86 processors, thus requiring an Intel 80386 or compatible. While the OS kernel is 32-bit, much code, especially for the user interface, remained 16-bit for performance reasons as well as development time constraints. This had a detrimental effect on system stability and led to frequent application crashes. The introduction of 32-bit file access in Windows for Workgroups 3.11 meant that 16-bit real mode MS-DOS is not used for managing the files while Windows is running, and the earlier introduction of the 32-bit disk access means that the PC BIOS is often no longer used for managing hard disks. DOS can be used for running old-style drivers for compatibility, but Microsoft discourages using them, as this prevents proper multitasking and impairs system stability. Control Panel allows a user to see which MS-DOS components are used by the system. Optimal performance is achieved when they are bypassed. The Windows kernel uses MS-DOS-style real-mode drivers in safe mode, which exists to allow a user to fix problems relating to loading native, protected mode drivers. Core improvements in OEM service releases. OEM service releases of Windows 95 introduced support in Windows for several core new technologies which were not included in the original release of Windows 95. These include the Internet Explorer web browser, drive space compression, OpenGL, DirectX, FAT32 file system support, Ultra DMA mode for disk drives, Universal Serial Bus, IEEE 1394, FireWire, and accelerated graphics port. Accessibility features. Windows 95 introduced computer accessibility features like sticky keys, filter keys, toggle keys, mouse keys. Microsoft Active Accessibility API was introduced as an add-on for Windows 95. System requirements. Official system requirements were an Intel 386DX CPU of any speed, 4 MB of system RAM and 55 MB of hard disk space depending on features selected. These minimal claims were made in order to maximize the available market of Windows 3.1 migrations. This configuration would rely heavily on virtual memory and was only optimal for productive use on single-tasking dedicated workstations. 28. It was possible to run Windows 95 on a 386SX, but this led to even less acceptable performance due to its 16-bit external data bus. To achieve optimal performance, Microsoft recommended an i486 or compatible CPU with at least 8 MB of RAM. 29. Windows 95 may fail to boot on computers with a processor faster than 2.1 GHz and more than approximately 480 megabytes of memory. 30, 31, 32. In such a case, reducing the file cache size or the size of video memory can help. 30. The theoretical maximum according to Microsoft is 2 GB. 33. Most copies of Windows 95 were on CD-ROM, but a 312-inch floppy version was also available for older machines. The retail floppy disk version of Windows 95 came on 13 DMF formatted floppy disks, while OSR 2.1 doubled the floppy count to 26. Both versions exclude additional software that the CD-ROM version might have featured. Microsoft Plus for Windows 95 was also available on floppy disks. Upgradability. Windows 95 was superseded by Windows 98, which also included the Windows Desktop Update and Internet Explorer 4 by default. It could still be directly upgraded by either Windows 2000 Professional, 34, or Windows Me. Office 2000 is the last version of Microsoft Office to be compatible with Windows 95. Similarly, Windows Media Player 7.0, released in June 2000, and DirectX 8.0a, released in February 2001, are the last versions of Windows Media Player and DirectX available for Windows 95, respectively. Internet Explorer. Windows 95 originally shipped without Internet Explorer, and the default network installation did not install TCP/IP, the network protocol used on the Internet. At the release date of Windows 95, Internet Explorer 1.0 was available, 35, but only in the Plus add-on pack for Windows 95, which was a separate product. The Plus pack did not reach as many retail consumers as the operating system itself. It was mainly advertised for its non-internet related add-ons such as themes and better disk compression, but was usually included in pre-installed OEM sales, and at the time of Windows 95's release, the web was being browsed mainly with a variety of early web browsers such as NCSA Mosaic and Netscape Navigator, promoted by products such as iBox. Windows 95 OEM Service Release 1 was the first release of Windows to include Internet Explorer, version 2.0, with the OS. While there was no uninstaller, it could be deleted easily if desired. OEM Service Release 2 included Internet Explorer 3. The installation of Internet Explorer 4 on Windows 95, or the OSR 2.5 version pre-installed on a computer, gave Windows 95 active desktop and browser integration into Windows Explorer, known as the Windows Desktop Update. The CD version of the last release of Windows 95, OEM Service Release 2.5, version 4.00.950C, includes Internet Explorer 4, and installs it after Windows 95's initial setup and first boot are complete. While only the 4.x series of the browser contained the option to install the Windows Desktop Update features, the subsequent 5.x version had the option hidden. Editing the installer's configuration file located in a temporary folder would make the feature available in the installer. Alternatively, Windows 95 and Windows NT 4.0 users could first install IE4 with the desktop update before installing a newer version of Internet Explorer. The last version of Internet Explorer supported on Windows 95 is Internet Explorer 5.5 with SP2, which was released on the 23rd of July 2001. Windows 95 shipped with Microsoft's dial-up online service called the Microsoft Network, MSN. Release and promotion. The Windows 95 release included a commercial featuring the Rolling Stones' 1981 single Start Me Up, a reference to the Start button. 36. It was widely reported that Microsoft paid the Rolling Stones between $8 and $14 million for the use of the song in the Windows 95 advertising campaign. However, Microsoft said that this was just a rumor spread by the band to increase their market value, and the company paid $3 million. 37. A 30-minute promotional video, labeled a cyber sitcom featuring Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry, was also released to showcase the features of Windows 95. 38. Microsoft's $200 million advertising campaign featured stories of people waiting in line outside stores to get a copy. 39. In the UK, the largest computer chain PC World received a large quantity of point-of-sale material. Many branches opened at midnight to sell the first copies of the product. Copies of the Times were available for free, and Microsoft paid for 1.5 million issues, twice the daily circulation at the time. 40. In the United States, the Empire State Building in New York City was lit to match the colors of the Windows logo. 4. In Canada, a 100 330 feet banner was shung down the side of the CN Tower in Toronto. 41. The release included a number of fun stuff items on the CD, including music videos of Edie Brickell's Good Times, 42, and Weezer's Buddy Holly a trailer for the 1995 film Rob Roy and the computer game Hover. 43. Sales were strong, with 1 million copies shipped worldwide in just 4 days. 44. According to International Data Corporation, by the end of 1998, Windows 95 was the most used desktop OS with 57.4% of the market share, with its successor Windows 98 coming in second at 17.2%. Windows 95 also still sold more non-OEM copies to large customers in the month of May 1999, which analysts attributed to large companies opting to wait for the release of Windows 2000. 45. Editions. Several Windows 95 editions have been released. Only the original release was sold as a shrink-wrapped product. Later editions were provided only to computeromes for installation on new PCs. For this reason, these editions are known as OEM Service Releases, OSR. Together with the introduction of Windows 95, Microsoft released the Microsoft Plus for Windows 95 pack, which contained several optional components for high-end multimedia PCs, including Internet Explorer, drive space and additional themes. The first service pack was made available half a year after the original release and fixed several small bugs. 46. The second service pack mainly introduced support for new hardware, most notably support for hard drives larger than 2 GB in the form of the FAT32 file system. 47. This release was never made available to end users directly and was only sold through OEMs with the purchase of a new PC. A full third service pack was never released, but 2 smaller updates to the second were released in the form of a USB supplement, OSR 2.1, and the Windows Desktop Update, OSR 2.5. 48. Both were available as standalone updates and as updated disk images shipped by OEMs. OSR 2.5 was notable for featuring several changes to the Windows Explorer, integrating it with Internet Explorer 4.0. This version of Internet Explorer looks very similar to the one featured in Windows 98. Release code name, release date, version, software components, system properties. A. System files. B. Timestamps dos Internet Explorer. C. Drive space appendable DirectX. D. FAT32 info Windows 95, Retail and OEM. Chicago, August 24, 19954.000.950.07-1150:007.01.0 EM only to non-Microsoft Plus. For Windows 95 frosting 4.40.310995-007-1404:40:001.03 Service Pack 1 February 14, 1996, 54, 4.00.950 4.00.951, E, 1995-